You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Hollywood, 1939. The Hollywood Tower Hotel was a star in its own right, a beacon for the show business elite. Tonight's story in the Twilight Zone is somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction. That door is opening once again, and this time, it's opening for you.
WDW Radio, your information station.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to the WDW Radio Show, your guide to the Disney parks, experiences, movies, and more. I am your host, Lou Mangello, and this is show number 799. I cannot believe it has almost been 20 years and 800 episodes that we have spent and shared together. So whether this is your first time listening or you've been with me since the very beginning, thank you and welcome. In addition to subscribing to the podcast, I invite you to be part of the community and conversation over in the Clubhouse at wdwradio.com/clubhouse. Join me every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern for WDW Radio Live and sign up for our free weekly email newsletter. You can find everything at wdwradio.com. And we've got a fun show this week, just in time for the upcoming spooky season, which, according to Target, starts in about February. But this week, we're traveling back in time to Hollywood, 1939. Amid the glitz and glamour of a bustling young movie town at the height of its golden age, the Hollywood Tower Hotel, or in this case, the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, is a star in its own right. And it's filled with secrets and stories. So this week, I invite you, if you dare, to step aboard as we look at 10 things you never knew about the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. And speaking of the tower, I also share details about a very special event this October where we invite you, if you dare, for an evening at the Tip Top Club. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode and your favorite detail at the tower. You can come share your thoughts over in the Clubhouse at wdwradio.com/clubhouse or call the voicemail at 407-900-9391. And don't forget that the best way to stay connected, not just to the show, but to make sure you don't miss a thing, including upcoming events, is to sign up for my free weekly email newsletter, where you'll also get a free copy of my 102 Things to Do at least once in Walt Disney World book. You can find the sign-up form over at wdwradio.com/subscribe. You can also connect and chat with me on social. I am at Lou Mangello on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And please visit LouMangello.com if you're either looking for a speaker for your event, conference, or to your school, or if you are a creator, entrepreneur, or solopreneur looking to take your business, brand, or idea to the next level. You can find out some of the ways I can help you, we can work together, and about my Momentum series of in-person events, including my workshop this fall in Walt Disney World. We are down to our last 2 seats, but you can still save $200 off your ticket by using code LOU200. To find out more about speaking, coaching, or Momentum, you can visit LouMangello.com. And finally, if you like what you hear, and I hope that you do, please share the show, tell a friend, text or message somebody you think might enjoy the show. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of the WDW Radio Show. This week's story on WDW Radio is somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction, because we're about to unlock the door with the key of imagination and step into the shadowy realm of the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
And you may think you know all there is about this iconic attraction, but tonight's journey is going to reveal secrets beyond sight, beyond sound, and beyond mind. Because in this episode, we're going to uncover 10 things you never knew about the tower, stories that will take you on a strange and mysterious journey where you are the star and your elevator travels directly to the Twilight Zone. And joining us on our journey once again is Kendall Foreman, longtime friend, contributor, editor, blogger, all around amazing human. Welcome back.
Hey, I'm glad to be back. And every time we do one of these, I always wonder what your introduction is going to be. And I have to admit, I would have been very disappointed if you didn't pull out the somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction quote.
I tried to see like how much Tower of Terror and Twilight Zone I can sort of mush into a single relatively short introduction. And we've talked about this attraction before. You've written about this attraction and the exterior and the architecture and some of the details before. And that's why when I wanted to do this specifically this week, for obvious reasons, I absolutely wanted you to be a part of it. So tell me first, is Tower of Terror for you, is the attraction itself like a must-do?
It has always been a must-do for me. I rode it the first summer that it opened. It has always been one of my favorites. Some of the members of my family, it was not their favorite. They were one and done. But for my dad and I, this was a rush there. The second that MGM Studios opened, it was always where we went first. And then once I got married, it was my husband and I loved it too. And then for our son, he literally shook the first time that he rode it, but he has come around to it and he's ridden this and he's ridden the Guardians of the Galaxy version in Disneyland.
So that's my next question for you. Is it the ride system that you love, or is it the Twilight Zone layer on top of it? Is it the Twilight Zone storytelling? Like, were you a Twilight Zone fan growing up, or are you a Twilight Zone fan now?
I was not a Twilight Zone fan. I've seen 1 or 2 episodes of the show, but even without having seen it, it had such a great depth of story. So the whole, envelopment in this storyline, and I always have loved that era of music. So I was pulled in right away the second you enter that queue and you hear those, that brass music drawing you in. And I think really for me, yes, I love the drop. I love once they made it more than one drop, I much prefer that. But I don't necessarily think it's the ride system, although it's great. But I think for me, it's more the story and the full, I feel like this is one of the peaks of Imagineering.
So I wonder if there is a show idea in this, like attractions where the pre-show is better than the attraction itself. Like for me, Twilight Zone Tower of Terror is more about everything leading up to it. As I walk down Sunset, especially if you go like at the right time and you sort of have this sort of foreboding hotel off in the distance as you approach. I love walking through the extended queue, which is not always open. I love that sort of eerie placemaking and the details as you walk through, not even once you get inside the lobby, but as you approach and from outside, like, obviously when we enter the tower, we're not entering through the lobby, we're entering through this side entrance, because if you were sort of checking into the hotel, you'd sort of be checking in via the gift shop. But for me, it's about the storytelling, it's about the placemaking. And as a Twilight Zone fan, like I love New Year's Day, like even though I can stream Twilight Zone whenever I want, I sort of love just having Twilight Zone playing on broadcast TV throughout the day when they have those day long or weekend long marathons. So it is about the storytelling for me. I love what they do at the attraction and I love what it's based on. Like I like the fact that this is a Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, not necessarily a Guardians of the Galaxy Tower of Terror.
Yeah, and I definitely can appreciate the one in Disneyland too, because I love the music out there and I feel like that one has almost more of a bounce to it. You get that fun little bounce going that's a little less intimidating. But
yeah, that's more party. This is more, relatively dark-ish storytelling. So, there's so much out about this attraction, but one of the things I love, and as we have started talking, and you, like I said, you have written about on the blog before, is there is so much history to how this attraction came to be, and there's so many layers of storytelling that are sometimes almost hiding in plain sight, and that's why we're going to cover 10-ish. We'll see how many are actually. I had a very tough time narrowing this down to 5, by the way. But 10-ish things you probably never knew about the Tower of Terror. So you are my guest. You are my friend. I still believe in ladies first. And I'm very curious to hear, what is the first thing that is on your list? And is it the most surprising thing for you? Is it the most interesting thing? Or is it the first thing that came to mind?
My favorite one's going to come last, but I decided to move from the beginning and then move through the attraction with the 5 that I chose. So I'm going to start at the very beginning, which is the concept. And I have to preface all of this with saying, I don't think there is any attraction that currently exists that has more stories about how it began. And it depends who you talk to, whose memoir you read, what interview you watch, what episode of Behind the Attraction you watch, that you get all these different stories from different Imagineers. And I so bad wish that we could just put them all in a room and get the answer of what order did all of this happen in, and who actually did what, and who was on what team, and why didn't this one pan out? I know in the past you and I have talked about how this original concept included the possibility of an actual hotel that you would stay in. We talked about that extensively. And we also talked back on show, I think 632 and 633, when we talked about the Disney decade, the Mel Brooks concept for kind of either Castle Young Frankenstein or a Hollywood horror hotel. But those were not the only concepts that they went through in this long circuitous journey to get to the Twilight Zone version of this. And one of the very earliest ones was a murder mystery hotel, because they knew they wanted some type of drop attraction. But at that point in time, they were starting with the very basic, take them up, drop, and typically those would roll out at the bottom. And they knew they wanted something like that. They knew they wanted something in the horror genre. And immediately everyone thinks of Vincent Price. And they were contemplating having Vincent Price either narrate or having, the character that he was be the top suspect in this murder mystery where a murder's occurred in the basement of this hotel in the swimming pool. But Michael Eisner nixed that one. And so they kind of pivoted to a different horror attraction. And you can read about this in Kevin Rafferty's book that he wrote, Magic Journey, My Fantastical Walt Disney Imagineering Career. And he talks about a show called the Creature's Choice Awards, which would have been more of a comical type look at the horror genre, the monster movie genre. And it would have included an Eddie Murphy as Frankenstein's monster animatronic, possibly an Elvira animatronic, legendary monsters like Godzilla. But ultimately this was too expensive, and that also got rejected. Another centered around the idea of this kind of crazed silent film movie director who's upset that silent films are gone, and he decides to take this out on cutting the cable on the elevator at this party that was taking place at the hotel. And a lot of these seem like they had concept art. They were very early stage. So ultimately, all of these different ideas, pieces are taken from each one and kept. The tone is changed, and eventually they get to kind of a brainstorm session between Kevin Rafferty and Steve Kirk, and it's kind of impromptu, and that's how they ultimately get to this Twilight Zone type theme.
Yeah, you and I are very much in alignment with the first thing that came to mind for me too was what almost was and what could have been. Like, my two worlds almost collided, like my love of Disney and my love of Mel Brooks and Young Frankenstein. And while I love what we got, as we start hearing some of the explanations of, like, I wanted to be in the meeting between Mel Brooks, Michael Eisner, and Marty Sklar. Because Mel Brooks supposedly and his son Max are huge Disney fans, like huge Disneyland fans. So this was not something that was just pitched to Mel that was like, let's try and convince you why you should create an attraction at Disney Park, but probably something that he seemed to be. And of all the things, look, I have a lot of questions for Mel Brooks. This was one of the things I would love to chat with him about, because my understanding is that he was very much interested in collaborating, because this would allow his work to have an impact that would be relatively-ish forever in a different sort of way of storytelling other than the two-dimensional, movies on film. So this Castle Young Frankenstein and this Hollywood horror hotel, it made me start thinking about, sort of what the Haunted Mansion was supposed to be, right? This sort of balance of horror and humor, the Mark Davis versus some of the other folks that wanted to be a little more scary, and this comedy version of a Haunted Mansion. And part of the concept that I think was most appealing to me was the idea of your attraction experience was going to take place not when you got to Disney MGM Studios, but when you got to the Orlando airport, and this Ford Woody station wagon from the late 30s was going to be modified and drive you to this hotel. And there's, like you said, there's sort of different reasons that I've read that this did not happen. But as it started to move away from this Mel Brooks concept, he went to go work on Life Stinks. I wish he would have stayed to work on this as well. But the different iterations that you sort of reference to as to what the theming should be, what the story should be, this idea that let's move away from the humor aspect and let's move away towards something that is both eerie and a little thrilling, drawing on the elements from the Twilight Zone, which changed the design of the hotel. It changed sort of the theme, because I think one of the challenges they have was, how do you align the theme of the Tower of Terror with this overarching theme of the studios, which was on, movies and TV. So making sure that it had to match, because there were some concepts that I'd read about, Kendall, about like volcanoes and Jules Verne and geysers from the Old West that did not fit in with this 1930s, 1940 setting of the park. There was one idea about a studio wrap party at like a modern hotel where the owner started killing guests, which, I think the murder-centric storyline may have been a little bit too dark for a Disney park. You mentioned Vincent Price. It was an idea for a walkthrough attraction, but Eisner really wanted this to be something where there was going to be more guest immersion and guest involvement, and this idea eventually getting to this integration of the Twilight Zone theme. But the idea for me that it was almost an actual hotel was fascinating to me. And the original concept from Bob Weiss, and I would love to just sort of pick his brain about this was going to be a 1930s Art Deco style hotel that was going to be at the entrance to the studios. And this led, him to sort of go out with his team to start touring the historic LA hotels and theaters like the Chateau Marmont and the Wilmer Theater for different types of inspiration. There was one concept that it was going to be a murder mystery scavenger hunt, and guests would look for and find clues around the hotel grounds, and the staff and the cast members would sort of be actors, sort of providing hint through, key phrases and different clues that would lead to you almost getting this certificate of award for solving the mystery. So a lot of different sort of iterations of it being an attraction, a hotel, and immersive type experience that involved live actor interactions and animatronics and other immersive elements, which were eventually scrapped for a variety of reasons. I think, guest throughput is one, expense is another, making sure it is not only attractive, but accessible to as many guests as possible. I'm happy with what they came up with. Again, being a Twilight Zone fan, I think you don't have to necessarily be a fan to understand it and appreciate it. But I think, like you said, the history of this attraction is probably the most varied, and I think circuitous is the exact right word for it. Back to you. What was number 2 on your list?
Oh, you're counting that as your first one?
I am counting that as my first one.
Okay. Pause. I was waiting for you to carry on with your first. Okay.
It was, my piggyback was actually like 2 that were on my list, right? Okay. It was the Young Frankenstein, My Worlds Colliding, and the fact that it was an actual hotel. So as opposed to extending it with multiple honorable mentions, I just sort of merged them all into one.
Fair enough. Okay. I'm going to take us back to 1923, over a century ago, when the Hollywood sign in Los Angeles said Hollywood Land. And I'm also going to assume that there's probably several people listening who never read the first blog entry of my architecture series. So I'm going to pull from that. And that Hollywoodland sign was there to serve as a giant display for the Hollywoodland real estate venture. And that was a big housing development. And below those towering letters, down on the street in what is today actually North Beechwood Drive, on either side of that, there were two French Norman-style towers that served as the entry gate into Hollywoodland, and it separated that from the rest of Los Angeles to kind of give it some prestige. And today, those two gates are still there. You can still see them, and actually, interestingly enough, in the eastern half of it, there's a tiny community library in there, and they're a part of they've been designated as a historical monument. So what does this have to do with the Tower of Terror? Well, those two stone gates are reproduced almost exactly out in front of the Tower of Terror, and they're very easy to miss because as you approach, you're not really paying attention to those. You're paying attention to the giant building with people screaming inside of it. But they are almost identical replicas, and I feel like they serve as a really great little bit of placemaking because it gives you that old Hollywood feel, the 20s and 30s, but also they're kind of abandoned guardhouses. It kind of gives you this first clue that something's not quite right here as you approach. And a lot of people, if you can't think of these off the top of your head, they used to serve as the shelter for the Fast Pass kiosks.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that every guest sees, but nobody notices, right? We walk right by them, not sort of understanding why. We sometimes forget, Kendall, there's a reason why everything is there. And even in what looks like just maybe standard sort of placemaking towers, I love the fact that there, especially for places like Disney Hollywood Studios, there is a real world connection and a reason to why they're there. I'm not piggybacking off that, but to sort of further the impact of that story, did you know that the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror and Rock and Roller Coaster are connected? I don't mean physically connected. I don't mean necessarily geographically connected, but they actually are linked through interconnected backstories, due in part because of where they sit at the end of Sunset Boulevard. Kendall's looking at me like I am an absolute crazy person. It's true. So G-Force Records, which is the fictional studio behind Rock and Roller Coaster, currently starring Aerosmith, was actually sort of like an ally of the Hollywood Tower Hotel. And during that infamous Hollywood night, that Halloween night in 1939, when guests mysteriously vanished from the tower, one of the folks that disappeared was a producer from G-Force Records. So the story is that the record company opened in the 30s, but after the disappearance in 1939, the company fell on hard times. It didn't come back into prominence until the hotel reopened and is now supposedly currently booking major acts. And the hotel's reopening is what brought newfound success to G-Force Records, which now books major acts like Aerosmith. And if you look very carefully in the queue of G-Force, I'm not going to tell you exactly where, but now I want you to go and try and find it. You can see that the connection to Tower of Terror is actually subtly referenced in the queue for G-Force Records.
Now I'm going to have to do some internet diving because in my older years, I don't frequent Rock and Roller Coaster as much as I used to.
Just, you know what? Rock and Roller Coaster is another one where, like, just go through the queue and then just chicken exit out once you get to the actual load area.
True. It is a time commitment, though.
Yeah, that's true. All right, what is next on your list?
Speaking of going through the queue, I'm going to go ahead and enter the actual building proper. And I think as you enter the lobby, it's very easy to get very overwhelmed when you go in there. There's a lot happening. People are being herded into an area, and also there's a lot to look at it, and it's very captivating because it is something from such a different time than our own. There's so much to look at and take in where that's concerned. And then to use the ghost hosts line from the Haunted Mansion, all of those cobwebs give everything an air of foreboding. That you want to look deeper at what's stuck under them, what luxury is attempting to break through that near century of grime and everything that's in there. And there's so much to discover inside of the lobby, which I won't step on whatever you may be planning to cover in there, because there is a plethora of details in the lobby. I just want to focus on the obvious thing, the elevators. And to be honest, I don't know how many times I have gone on this attraction, countless. I don't know that up until the last time or two that I ever really took the time to look at the elevator that is in the lobby. And I think also too, you kind of come in there and it takes your eyes a minute to adjust. You're coming out of the Florida sun and it's darker in there. And so I think between that and getting, everyone wants to make their way to the library doors. So sometimes you can walk right past the elevator without looking at it. But I would encourage everybody to stop and really take a look at the work that has been done there, that, the cracks, the plaster cracks, and the fact that the dial is reading past 12 to a floor that's not supposed to exist. And these doors are bowed and bent, and which some people on the recesses of the internet like to claim that if a shaft fell, that it would make the doors blow out. But to me, it seems like you would need some kind of actual vacuum in there in order to achieve that. If somebody listening is a physics expert and can clue us in onto what would actually happen there, I would be fascinated to know. But either way, those doors give you some kind of clue that something drastic has happened here. And then once you've kind of taken that in, just something that is so big but so easily overlooked, give the directory a look that's hanging on the wall between the two elevators, which it's one of those old, velvet or felt ribbed style signs that you'd press letters into. And a lot of the letters over this, decades, century have fallen off. And if you look really close in the bottom at the letters that are left down there, they spell out a warning about the elevators. And over the years, they've said things like take the stairs or evil tower or you are doomed. So go take a look and see what message they have for us now.
So I've always loved that. And the evil tower, you are like, that was one of the things I always loved, bringing people into the attraction and showing them, like those letters that had fallen. Evil Tower, you are you, the letter U, and are doomed, was there for years. They actually changed that after 9/11 because they wanted to remove any reference to sort of quote unquote evil tower. And I don't even know what the current one is. Now I need like a research trip to go because some of these things do change over time. There was one that I wanted to get to, but I have a feeling it would be better placed after one that I have a feeling that you are going to mention coming up. So I have way more than 5 on my list, and I don't necessarily need to know. All right. So here's a little, did you know, this will be a super quick one. Did you know that when the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror first opened in Walt Disney World, there were no seatbelts?
Yes.
Not the guests were just sort of flying around the compartment.
But if you were a small kid, you kind of did fly around. You kind of
did fly, right? Because depending on sort of who was there. So when it opened, it didn't have seatbelt. Instead, there was a single lap bar that stretched across the entire row of guests. So there's inherent problems in that design because the guest sitting next to you might be of a slightly different size than you, which leads to potential safety concerns. And you're right, especially smaller guests. And there have been stories, true or otherwise, of smaller guests, being able to sort of wiggle their way out from under the lap bar. And then they did a very relatively short closure to put in the individual seat belts to enhance the safety. And I remember that. I remember sort of, because you got a little bit of air when you were able to ride. And did you ever do like the penny trick or the quarter trick?
Yes.
Way back when we used to carry? I used to take...
That's one of my favorite memories because as a child, I have always been a Disney World nerd. I was always looking up whatever I could find. And I found out before one of our trips, I was like, Dad, you're not going to believe this. Like, if you put a penny on your leg, it's going to float in the air because it goes faster than gravity. And so I loved it because we got on the ride and we sat down and my dad pulled a penny out and he held it until we got closer to that shaft and he sat it on his leg and I watched it. We watched it float. And it was kind of like this validation of my Disney nerddom from my dad. Like he believed me and he had the penny and we both saw it and it's a great memory.
Well, I think that's one of the things that got passed on from like person to person, right? And that was because it's a gift to us when we're able to make somebody else sort of go eyes wide open and we can show them something cool that they might not have seen or done otherwise in Walt Disney World.
Definitely.
Okay, so back to you.
Okay. I'm going to move into the pre-show to talk about the actual film that you see when the TV turns on. And Imagineers knew in development that they couldn't possibly have a Twilight Zone attraction without and somehow including the host, Rod Serling. But he had passed away. And so you can actually read a quote from the Imagineering show writer, Michael Sprout, in a 1994 issue of Disney News Magazine. He says, "I thought we could really find the right moment when he wasn't referring to anything specific to that particular episode. He also had to be in front of a neutral background so we could just slop him in as part of our episode." And so they watched every single episode closely, and they ended up finding the perfect shot in 1961 season 3 episode 8, It's a Good Life. And that's about a young boy named Anthony with astounding powers and kind of an evil bent. So think like Wanda Maximoff's Scarlet Witch. And I won't give away what happens, but if you have watched the Behind the Attraction episode about the Tower of Terror, they show some clips from some of the different Twilight Zone episodes in there. And there's a very short, albeit quite disturbing, clip of a human Jack-in-the-Box that comes from this episode. But in the opener of that episode, Rod Serling is standing in front of a map of the United States. And it's there that he delivers that classic line about how the story is somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction. And then referring to the map behind him, he says, "This, as you may recognize, is..." And then that's when they cut in with the voiceover and the video that they created specifically for the attraction. But because they found that clip and they were so able to impeccably blur that line between the two that it's very hard to tell at all that it isn't all Rod Serling. And interestingly enough, that direction for that whole pre-show was done by Joe Dante, the director of Gremlins. And then he also directed the portion of the 1983 Twilight Zone movie that referenced that It's a Good Life episode.
God, so I love this, and I'm all excited because there's like so many parts of this that I love, because he originally says, "This, as you may recognize, is a map of the United States." It's one of my favorite all-time episodes of the Twilight Zone. It is wonderfully creepy. It was recreated in the Twilight Zone movie that was done in the 80s. It also stars Billy Mooney, who is Anthony Fremont. Billy Mooney you may recognize from some other shows back in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. But what I love about this is that Rod Serling appears in this attraction. You talked about blurring the line. They also blurred out the cigarette that he's holding in his hand. And if you watch his hand closely, you think he's doing the 2-finger point, but he's not. They actually blurred out the cigarette that he was holding that he often smoked as he was introducing the Twilight Zone. This actually leads me, I'm so excited, this leads me to one of the things that I wanted to point out that you probably never noticed before. You talked about moving into the pre-show and into the library, and there are libraries often hold secrets. There are a ton, and I could spend all day talking about some of the secrets and references to Twilight Zone that are here, but hidden in these dimly lit rooms, and there are two libraries, there's a left and right, is an envelope, and one of them is addressed to Rod Serling. The other is addressed to Victoria West. And these are not references to anything that happens at the hotel, but this is a nod to a Twilight Zone episode called A World of His Own. So one, it looks like Rod Serling's royalty check is sitting there waiting for him because he never collected it. But if you go into the right side library, and you can't choose, it's where the cast member sent you, there's an envelope with Rod Serling's name on it behind a cage. And the left library has an envelope with Victoria West's name on it. So the idea was that, again, you talked about they used his footage from the 1975 episode. Voice actor Mark Silverman did his own impersonation of him for the pre-show and the narration. So because they used his likeness, this is his sort of royalty commission paycheck. But this references the episode where there's a playwright by the name of Gregory West, and he has this magical tape recorder where anything that he says, anything he wants, he's able to bring to life. And his wife, Victoria West, was one of those things that he brought to life. It's a little weird and creepy, but that's fine. And when she discovers like the truth, he actually burns the tape. Like he used to, it was like a actual physical tape recorder. Kids, you can Google what it is. And when he burns the tape, it makes her vanish. And in this very rare occasion, the character in the episode interacts with Rod Serling himself, and then he tosses an envelope which is labeled Rod Serling into a fire and causes Rod Serling to disappear. And this really was sort of kind of Rod Serling's first on-screen appearance, like in an episode, certainly the first time he ever interacted. So the two characters that were, unlike Anthony Fremont wishing him away into a cornfield, were sort of burned away in the fire. That is why you can find those two envelopes in the libraries. Nerd alert. Sorry, I got very excited over that.
I thought you were going for the Anthony Fremont cornfield reference.
I snuck it in a little bit. It's so good. Wish him away, lobby. Anthony. Wish him away into because I don't want to go. There's so many good references in the lobby. Maybe I'll make that my next one. I'll talk about a couple. We can talk a little bit about the lobby. Let's keep going.
It's astounding. I mean, between the lobby and the unload area and the library.
It's why the pre-show is a better attraction than the attraction. You can just email me, Lou, at WDW when you disagree with what I just said. Plus, anybody can participate, right? There's no sort of height requirement to the lobby. There's no sort of, fear factor to the lobby, but it's worth going through, but especially if you are a fan.
Definitely. Okay, so I'm up to 5. So I'm going with my favorite one of all. And I don't know, maybe everyone else knows this, but I forget I was, like now minus 2 years ago old when I figured this out. The trippiest part of this whole attraction, in my opinion, is, and it's one of the greatest how did they do that moments. I mean, now, we all know how, but when the attraction first debuted, it was, how is this elevator leaving the shaft? How are we traveling horizontally across the floor? Like, this is not how elevators work. And we're moving into the 5th dimension. And there's lightning, and there's eerie projections, and all the icons of the Twilight Zone can be seen there, like the swirling vortex, and the eyeball, and the cracked window, and E = MC squared, and the ticking clock, and everything. And with all of these disconcerting projections, and just like the tension of when is this thing going to drop, because it's going to happen, it's easy to miss the fact that you're moving horizontally, but actually up through the elevator shaft. And the clue that you get for this is if you, right when that level opens, look at the lights on the wall. They're sconce-style lights, but they're hanging the wrong way. They're hanging horizontally with the bottom pointed towards you. And you think these columns are columns, but they're not. They're floors. And all the pipes are running horizontally, which they should not be. They should be running vertically. So what you're doing is, if you can imagine, like when you're horizontal, and I feel like I need to be able to be seen in order to explain this, but when you're moving horizontal, it's actually like you're laying back and moving up through the shaft. Mm-hmm. And you might be listening thinking, no, you're making stuff up. This makes no sense, whatever. And I would say, no. The proof comes right before you get to that swirly, glittery thing at the end of the shaft. And everyone's looking at the swirly, glittery thing. But I encourage you, don't look at the swirly, glittery thing. Look to your left. And it's going to take a split second to catch it because you only get a little bit of light. But there is a sideways set of elevator doors that looks just like the elevator doors that you got into in the boiler room. And I absolutely love this.
That is an awesome pull. That is an awesome, and that's why I wanted you to do this, right? Because you're right. We're so focused on the thing that we are being directed to see. And there are so many great, not just here, but in other attractions, like look away from the place you are quote unquote supposed to be looking. And that's where you can find some of these treasure troves. And I love the fact that this little detail was not just sort of overlooked, that it really emphasizes the placemaking and the storytelling and the effect that's actually happening to you.
Yes, it's
That's
that.
very
It's
cool.
that. It's that whole dimension. What direction are we moving? Where am I? What is happening?
I don't need, considering I piggybacked on you a couple of times, and listen, I'm just going to go through a couple of ones really quickly because I think these are just, they're super fun. And some of these, and I haven't been there in a while to see this one, but we talked about how the story for Tower of Terror begins before, just as you're sort of approaching and as you're getting into the queue and with the stone gates. The story actually begins not in the queue, but like you said, out on Sunset Boulevard, because outside that courtyard in front of Legends of Hollywood, partially, it's now sort of partially hidden by a tree. But if you look up, there's that billboard with the Hollywood Hotel sort of in its heyday. And I love that sense of foreshadowing. So when you see the decrepit hotel on the other side, you get a sense of foreboding and just how much has disrepair it's gone through after the incident. I don't know if this is there anymore. And I'm afraid that it's gone from the last time I was there and looked for it. But across the street, there is a road sign that says Route 66. And there used to be luggage at the bottom sitting there waiting to be picked up. And the story and the details that were on the luggage, and I'm not sure if even the stickers that are on there anymore. And I think it was either his initials or maybe it might have been like G. London. So actor Gilbert London, this was supposed to be his abandoned suitcase, still waiting to be picked up. You're like, Lou, who's Gilbert London? London was one of the ill-fated guests that was on the elevator on that fateful night in Halloween in 1939 when lightning struck the hotel. So if you know sort of the names of the folks that were on the elevator, this sort of helps to connect the dots, and you have this like very cool aha moment. You know, you talked very briefly about this version of the Tower of Terror and the California version, the Paris version, and the Tokyo version. And each one is different, not just in terms of storytelling, but I love how the architecture is different. Obviously, California, originally themed similar to Florida, obviously reimagined with the Guardians of the Galaxy theme, which replaced the Hollywood Tower motif. But if you look really carefully, you see that the Florida version, which we know was given its certain color palette in order, because it was going to be visible from Epcot as you looked over Morocco, but it has a sort of pinkish hued colored neo-Mediterranean style, which really kind of blends in with that Sunset Boulevard theme. And you see like the red tile roofs and the arched windows and doorways, a lot of the stucco walls and the keystones. And it's actually took some of its inspiration from two iconic Hollywood hotels, the Mission Inn Hotel in Riverside and the Chateau Marmont Hotel in Hollywood. And if you sort of look at pictures of the hotels next to each other, you can see a lot of things that are similar, like the twisted columns and the ornamental archways that really sort of reflect that Spanish Gothic architecture. And then if you look at the ones in Paris, it is a little bit more Art Deco with sort of a boxy yellow and teal look. And then Tokyo, which has a completely different storyline and is very cool and is very, very creepy. It may be the best, Tokyo may be the best. It's this more of a Moorish revival architecture, which looks more like a New York brownstone than it does the Disney MGM, I still call it MGM Studios version. The last thing, I think we would be remiss if we just didn't talk about how the lobby is just replete with so many references to Twilight Zone episodes, but I love the fact that there is like a little bit of sheet music for a song called What No Mickey Mouse, which appears under a trumpet, which is a reference to one of the Twilight Zone episodes, and near a Ouija board, which is also a reference to a Twilight Zone episode. But I love the fact that authenticity was so important. So a lot of times Imagineers could not find the kind of furniture that they were looking for. So they had some of it recreated. Like they had some items built from scratch from a 1920s furniture catalog, like specifically for a pattern. But there are some items in there that are actual antiques that were sort of purchased from antique stores. So there's these like 17th century Renaissance chairs that look very similar to ones that are in the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Other chairs came from the Jonathan Club, which is a very famous Hollywood landmark built in the 20s. But if you go through, and we could spend an entire episode just looking through some of the details, I love the exacting place setting that they were trying to make. Like even the Mahjong game, right? We might already know the story of the Mahjong game, which was a very popular pastime in the 30s. This was set up and played by professional Mahjong players. And while the game was in progress, Imagineers were like, all right, stop playing, like get up and walk away. And that's exactly how they left it. They left it like literally the chairs pushed back as they had just gotten up and the game in the midst of being played. So it adds a little bit of a spooky element to it. And I just love all of as a Twilight Zone like fan, I love seeing all of the references, and I still discover ones here and there. And one of my favorite ones, if you go in the libraries, there's a little red box that you might have found like in a diner in the 50s. It was from a movie called The Nick of Time, which starred Captain Kirk, William Shatner. And there's a little sort of like demon head on top. And he sort of became addicted to this game that would sort of predict his futures at this little cafe, this roadside cafe in Ohio. And I love being able to find things that instantly make you might not know the episode name, you might know all the details, but if you were a Twilight Zone fan, they sort of instantly sort of make your ears perk up because you remember seeing it from some of the episodes that, in my case, I grew up with on reruns. I did not actually see the episodes during the first run. Is there one, when you go, Kendall, is there one detail, is there one thing that if you bring somebody that is brand new, you love showing them most? Like the cool feature, the cool detail, something that is that sort of wow moment?
I mean, definitely. I like the horizontal shaft. I like the Mahjong table. One that I just found out while we were researching for this that I think is kind of cool that I'm going to look for the next time I'm there is that the two lamps that are in the lobby, the lampshades are made from actual vintage flapper dresses that they took apart and repurposed into lampshades. And I think that's just really interesting that the way they were able to blend together all of these items from the show that maybe actual props, maybe reproductions of props, but they blend those with actual real life items from the 20s and 30s. And so it creates this environment that is so believable. Mm. Like you don't feel like you're walking amongst props from a TV show. You feel like you're, walking in an environment that actually existed.
One of the coolest things, and I've been very fortunate to be part of and host a number of incredible events over the years with our community. And one of the coolest things we ever did was I called it Twilight at the Tower, where we did a special event at the Tower of Terror. And you want to talk about an amazing surprise and delight moment when the cast members literally took down the velvet ropes and allowed us to go into the lobby. And you're right. You do feel, so first of all, the lobby was designed, it very much looks like the Biltmore in California, but there is this incredible sense of placemaking and authenticity that's in there. And as you walk around, you realize that some of the things are not just recreated props, but authentic pieces of history. And as a Twilight Zone fan, I love the references from the lobby to the library to the boiler room and the elevator, and then on the way out and in sort of that post-show area as well, because I think even after the attraction is over, the story sort of still continues and sort of bleeds over as you exit. And even when you leave too, when you leave the gift shop, turn around and look at the windows on the outside and the two little vignettes. There's sort of great storytelling that happens in those two. It gives you a sense of time. It sort of subtly hints that it is actually Halloween. And I think a lot of people just, because those windows are behind you, you never sort of turn around and look. And if you are a Twilight Zone fan, I had counted no less than like 35 different episode references in those places as you start to enter and then as you leave the attraction as well. Did you also know, last thing, did you also know that this is the first theme park attraction to be adapted into a movie?
I mean, I guess thinking back, yeah. I mean, since made for TV
Had,
movie, not released
right. I mean,
in the
it
theater.
had nothing. It had nothing to do with the attraction itself. So, the Twilight Zone Tower Tour was the first attraction made into a movie. It was a made-for-TV film starring Steve Guttenberg and Kirsten Dunst back in 1997. And for years, a new movie more closely tied to the attraction has supposedly been in development, with director Taika Waititi attached to direct it, and Scarlett Johansson was set to star and help produce the film. This was really sort of around for years. In 2021, I think she signed on to do a reboot of the movie. She then obviously had her legal issues with Disney as a result of that. And I think the movie just sort of sits in limbo. But I think, not every theme park attraction translates well onto screen. Some do. Pirates of the Caribbean, I'm looking at you. But I think Tower is one that could very much lend itself to not just referencing the storyline that's in the theme parks, but integrating some of the cool storytelling. I think Rod Serling was a master storyteller, and some of the storytelling that he brought to the TV show as well.
Well, an interesting little tidbit connection between the movie and the attraction too is that the little girl that's in the elevator. Now, I haven't double checked this on IMDb, but from what I understand, the little girl that's on the elevator also played Morgan on Boy Meets World, and then she reprised her role as the little girl in the Tower of Terror movie. So they actually used the same actress from the pre-show that you see in the actual movie.
Sally Shine. Her name was Sally in the elevator. Her character name is Sally, and she's holding a Mickey Mouse plush. Supposedly an original Mickey Mouse plush, like a very valuable Mickey Mouse plush that was authentic to the time period. So much for 10, right? So much for 10. It's the beauty and the challenge of trying to talk about some things you never knew, and fun facts and details about the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. I want to know from you, what is your either favorite episode referenced in the attraction, the queue? What is your favorite detail? What is something that maybe we missed that you think is one of the coolest little bits of trivia and things that we never know? Let me know. You can call the voicemail at 407-900-9391. That's 407-900-WDW1. I'll also post this question in the clubhouse at wdwradio.com/clubhouse. Also, make sure you go, and I'll link to these in the show notes. Check out some or all of Kendall's amazing articles, not just about the architecture in real life and the stone gates, but Kendall, how many years have you been writing and sharing?
11.
So has it been 11 years? We never even had an anniversary for your 10th anniversary. Now I feel bad. Now the Catholic Italian guilt is kicking in. All right. Next time you come to Walt Disney World, we'll have to celebrate. But yeah, you always bring it on the show and for the blog, and I really appreciate it.
It's a lot of fun. I have to ask, what's your favorite part of the Tower of Terror?
I thought you were going to ask me what was my favorite episode, because that one I might have a tough time with, but it might be A Good Life. It might be A Good Life. And if you go and watch the remade version of the Twilight Zone movie, which has some very good and very creepy parts, a lot of celebrity cameos in there as well, including Dan Aykroyd, like a very odd Dan Aykroyd cameo. My favorite, I think the placemaking, as much as I love the library, which is really a treasure trove of little details, some of which are obvious, some of which are more obscure that reference some of the Twilight Zone episodes. I think the boiler room is, and if you look at some of the giant boilers, they almost have faces to them, right? And these are sort of real pieces. I would love to sort of see how they source these pieces and bring these in and install these. Like, that just sort of is fascinating to me. But they almost look as though they have this personality to them, and that there's almost like these living, breathing things. But I think the placemaking in the boiler room and some of the cool little details as you approach, including there's a desk off in the corner that has a lot of little, like, neat little details and notes and radio and things like that. That may be the coolest part. And some of the details when you exit, where you go to tap to get your on-ride photo, look in that little storeroom back there at some of the little details and authentically themed and period pieces that are in there too.
I think my favorite thing actually isn't part of the attraction, but it's like the nervous, and then like sometimes if you get the right car full of people, like the nervous laughter at the end, or just the outright laughter, like the relief laughter of like, I thought this was going to be terrible, but I actually had a great time.
Speaking of laughter, do you know as you approach the attraction, you hear people screaming? Do you know that those are recorded screams? Those are not actual screams from guests?
I'm not surprised, because sometimes you're just like so shocked when it happens.
And next time you walk out of the attraction, all right, last one. Next time you walk out of the attraction, and if maybe there's people in your party waiting. By the way, do you know if you chicken exit out, if you sort of go through the queue and then you chicken exit out, do you know you actually have to get on an elevator in order to exit?
My dad and I got to ride the elevator once. Yeah. That's very strange.
But when you come out of the attraction, look to your left as you're walking through the hallway, and there's like a chalk square on some of the brick on the left-hand side. It references one of my favorite episodes called Little Girl Lost, where it's like Poltergeist. It's like Carol Ann like falls into like this void in the house. It was sort of loosely based on that episode from the Twilight Zone. I could go on and on because I love it so much. Check out Twilight Zone. It's streaming somewhere, and share your favorite thoughts or memories or stories or references from the Tower of Terror. And Kendall Foreman, thank you so very much. I always love doing these with you.
Absolutely. It's always a good time.
To Serve Man. It's a cookbook. Sorry. You never seen To Serve Man? Oh, good. Listen, on your next flight out here, you have to download. I'm going to give you top 10. Wait, last question. For those of you who are Twilight Zone fans, what are your top 3 Twilight Zone episodes ever? To Serve Man is one of them. Time Enough at Last. Look for the glasses in the lobby on the desk. Burgess Meredith is basically a one-man show. It's spectacular.
I've only seen, I can remember one episode vividly that our English teacher actually showed us. And I feel like it was almost like I Am Legend-ish, that like these people, like they think that they're being invaded by aliens, but actually they're the aliens.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, sorry. Spoiled now.
Next stop, Willoughby. I could go on and on. One of my favorite parts of the podcast are the in-person events we experience together. The podcast has always been the heart of what I do, but the community is the soul. And over the years, thank you, by the way, we've enjoyed not only attending events together, but hosted so many amazing cruises and meetups and created our own unique experiences in the parks, from our farewell event at the Adventurers Club to creating a one-night-only version of the American Adventurers Club at the American Adventure, to our e-ticket weekends, the 40-hour live show, and many, many more. And in the past, we've actually done not one, but 2 events at the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror after park close. You might have actually been there for that event. It was something we did called the Twilight at the Tower, which was an after-hours, very special event. They have never done it before. They created it for us and with us. And by us, I mean me and Becky Mankin from Mouse Fan Travel, who I am sure would agree that this was one of the most special, unique, and enjoyable events we have ever done. But the blessing and the curse of the event is that it was limited to less than 30 people because of where it was. It was very small, up on the balcony of Tower of Terror by the entrance to the lobby. There were some interactive experiences and food. And then, to everyone's surprise, they literally took down the velvet ropes and allowed us to go into the lobby, explore the lobby of the Hollywood Tower Hotel, and take photos. That's not what's happening for this event. Why? One, because 30 people went in and not 30 people came out, like the tower itself. That's actually not true. I'm just trying to build suspense. But for one reason or another, we'll probably never be able to do that event again. So if you were there and made it out, you were part of something special. But I do love that event. And for years, we've actually been trying, because a lot of you also asked, to bring that event back. And unfortunately, it can't. But I took some inspiration from that event. So on Saturday, October 26th, starting at 7 p.m., we're going to do something that once again has never been done before. We're not going to take you to the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. Instead, we're going to bring it to you with our evening at the Tip Top Club. Now, this event is not going to be at the Tower of Terror because obviously the elevator to the top floor is broken. So we're going to bring the Tip Top Club to you with an evening of dinner, dancing, a few surprises, and a live band. Now, unfortunately, it's not going to be the Anthony Fremont Orchestra because they were wished away into a cornfield somewhere. If you know the reference, you get the reference. It's one of my favorite episodes of the Twilight Zone. Yes, I'm a huge Twilight Zone fan. But if you look at the Tip Top Club sign at the Tower of Terror as you exit and make your way into the gift shop, you'll see that Anthony Fremont was the orchestra that was playing at the Tip Top Club, according to story. So because the fictional Anthony Fremont Orchestra is not available, instead, we're going with a band that I've seen a number of times in different locations that I instantly fell in love with because I dig this era. I dig this 1930s, 1940s music. And let's just say that this band has performed at the Tip Top Club before. If you went to Jollywood Nights last year and you went to the Twilight soiree at the Tip Top Club in the courtyard of the Tower of Terror, this band might just seem familiar to you. Now, there's also a few other surprises in store that I cannot tell you about now for a variety of reasons, but I invite you, if you dare. In fact, I welcome you to come in your 1930s best, your tea gowns, your broad-shouldered suits, fedoras. The glitz and glamour of old Hollywood can be created as much or as little as you like. If you want to come in shorts, that's fine too. This is going to be a limited event, and it does take place the day after our Halloween on the High Seas cruise on Saturday, October 26th. So it's also just a few days before Halloween, which I love. So it's going to be like the spooky time of year. But even though it's right after we finish our cruise, I wanted to create something that wasn't just going to be exclusively for the people who came on the cruise, but for everyone. So Becky and I got creative. We're able to do some things so that we could make the event larger, a little broader, to allow more people, including you, to join us. Now, tickets to the event are limited and were released initially to those of us who are joining us on the Halloween on the High Seas cruise first, and then to members of the WDW Radio Nation on Tuesday. And then I'm going to open up tickets to the clubhouse and you, the general public, on Wednesday morning, September 4th at 8 a.m. To learn more, to get all the details, and then purchase your tickets, go to www.radio.com/tiptop24. That's tip top and the number 24. And on Wednesday morning, I will put a link there in that post as well as in the clubhouse and the newsletter exactly where to purchase your tickets. And I also have to say that this event does not happen for many reasons and in many ways without the help and support and the incredible generosity of Mouse Fan Travel. I make a lot of jokes with and about Becky, but she and the Mouse Fan Travel team are incredibly generous in order for us to get the tickets, not just at this price, because event tickets are very, very expensive when you put things on at Disney. This is far from being a money-making event, but we just love this community and want to do cool stuff together. And in furtherance of that, Becky's also donating $20 per ticket to our Dream Team project to benefit Make-A-Wish. So know that there's a lot of good that comes at and through and with this event. And speaking of some other details and good things that come from the event, if you are attending, you will not need a theme park ticket for Disney's Hollywood Studios for the day if you just want to come to the event. I cannot tell you where exactly it is, but I can tell you that it's at Disney's Hollywood Studios, is for guests ages 16 and older, and tickets are $175 per person. And while I can't share a lot more detail with you at this time, we are going to bring the Tip Top Club to you. This is something that has not been done before. I'm super excited for this. I love Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. I love this era. I love Halloween time. So everything about this appeals to me on so many levels. And I am just excited to be able to do this for and with you. And I sincerely hope that you are able to join us for what I think is going to be a very special event. It's time for our Walt Disney World Trivia Question of the Week, where you can test your knowledge of Walt Disney World's history or see how well you pay attention to the details in which you see, hear, remember, or maybe even tasted. Pot roast mac and cheese, handwiches, I'm looking at you. And this week's trivia contest is once again brought to you by you, because by being part of the WDW Radio Nation, you help bring every episode of the show to life, and you're not only helping to support the show, but you're becoming part of the family. And for as little as $1 per month, you can help keep the magic alive and enjoy exclusive rewards like scavenger hunt, monthly group video calls, get access to our private community, get early access and discounts to special events. And depending on your level, you can also get specially curated care packages delivered right to your door. And most importantly, your support helps our Dream Team project, which sends children with life-threatening illnesses to Walt Disney World through our Dream Team project, which supports the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And thanks to the incredible generosity that you have shown over the years, we've raised more than $550,000, bringing true joy and magic and dreams coming true to countless families. I want to quickly thank some new and longtime members of the Nation family, including Nicholas Gorn, the Weber family, Julia Osborne Pakelny, Ken Franton, and Katie Cope. To learn more and join the Nation, you can visit wdwradio.com/support. Now, before we get to this week's question, let's go back, review last week's, and select our winner. So last week, we were talking about what is coming to the Disney parks, including Villain's Land. It might be fun to speculate on what we think or hope Villain's Land is going to look like and have in it. But one of the characters that we expect to see there is Chernabog from Fantasia. Now, we don't know if he's definitely going to be there, but he has been in Walt Disney World before, in parades. And your question last week was to tell me what 2 Walt Disney World parades featured Chernabog. I don't just mean in music, but physically represented in the parade. And thanks to so many of you who answered, this one was a little bit more tricky than I expected it to be. But the 2 parades that Chernabog was featured in were Spectro Magic, where he had the giant bald mountain float with the red lights, and he opened up his wings to reveal him. There was a lot of smoke and light features. This ran from about 91 through 99 and then came back in 2001 and ran until 2010. And the other parade he was in was Celebrate a Dream Come True Parade, along with other villains. I also took Share a Dream Come True Parade and Disney Dreams Come True Parade, but this was a daytime parade where there was a villains themed float that had a giant snow globe on it, and the giant Chernabog figure was sort of standing behind it, almost resting his arms on top of the snow globe. Anyway, I took all the correct entries, randomly selected one. Last week, you were playing for a WDW Radio keychain, stickers, pin, and some mystery items that I brought back just for you from D23, the Ultimate Disney Fan Event. And last week's winner, randomly selected, is Jason Guzman. So Jason, congratulations. Your prize package is already on its way. And if you played last week and didn't win, that's okay, because here's your next chance to enter in this week's Walt Disney World Trivia Challenge. So we talked about some of the secrets and details in the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror this week. And according to the pre-show video, how many people boarded that doomed elevator that got sent into the Twilight Zone? How many people were on board the elevator in 1939 that got sent into the Twilight Zone? You have until Sunday, September 8th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern to go to WDWRadio.com, click on this week's podcast, use the form there. Once again, you're going to play for a prize package that includes keychain, stickers, pin, and a mystery item. So good luck and have fun. Thank you so much for taking the time to subscribe and tune in this and every week. I sincerely appreciate you spending and sharing your time with me. Come be part of the community and conversation over in the clubhouse. Let me know what you think of this week's episode, what you want to hear or learn about on a future show, or talk about anything that you like in the Disney, Marvel, or Star Wars universes. And please don't forget to join me this and every Wednesday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern for WDW Radio Live, where you can not just watch, but chat, not just about this week's show, but you never know where I might be broadcasting from in Walt Disney World. Please connect and chat with me online. I am at Lou Mangello, and of course, I still believe that nothing beats a handshake and a hug, so check out the events page over at wdwradio.com/events for not only upcoming events like our night at the Tip Top Club, but upcoming cruises, Adventures by Disney, and our Meet of the Month this weekend on Saturday, as we say a fond farewell to Tom Sawyer Island in Magic Kingdom. And when you're ready to book your trip, not just to Walt Disney World, but Disney Cruise Line, Disneyland, or anywhere on this big, blue, beautiful planet of ours, please go and visit our friends and trusted partner at Mousefan Travel. They handle the planning so you can focus on making memories. They offer completely free vacation planning services and have been doing so for more than 20 years. We've been partners for like 18, 19 of those years. So please go and visit mousefantravel.com for a free no obligation quote today. And if you like the show, and I hope that you do, please help spread the word. Leave a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share a link to this or your favorite episode on social. Tag me at Lou Mangello so I can follow you back and reshare it. Please always remember to choose the good and find the good in everything and everyone that you encounter. Be an example and influence, and have a great day and even better tomorrow. So until next time, I love and appreciate you. See ya.
Hi, Lou. This is Jeff Liggett from Caledonia, Michigan. I just listened to your show 798, the 5 most missed attractions in Walt Disney World. And you nailed it, brother. You nailed it. The number one attraction I always think of when I think about attractions I'd love to go on again is If You Had Wings. That song just takes me back. So I know you can picture this. It's 1976, 7-year-old me from a small town in Michigan. First trip I'd ever been on there at Disney World, seeing all those beautiful scenes from Mexico and the Caribbean. It made such a huge, huge impression on me. But that song, wow. The other one, though, in your list that also was one of my personal favorites was the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea submarine ride. And, man, I was the same as you. I believed we were underwater that whole ride. I mean, it was amazing, wasn't it? I do remember going on it later in the 80s and sitting like maybe in the middle of the sub or so, kind of near where the cast member that operated the sub was, and looking up at that cast member and seeing daylight, and it, kind of just broke the spell. And I know, that we were really under the water, but still, I loved it, and I really wish more than anything that my kids could experience like I did. But anyway, thank you for the show, Lou. I'm a regular listener, and this is my first time calling in. I'm a huge fan, and I very much appreciate your positive vibe, Lou. Thank you.
Hey, Lou, this is Jim Smith calling from Hanover, Mass. Hey, I just finished listening to your episode on your top 5 of your favorite missed attractions, and these extinct attractions always hit me right in the feels. I have a soft spot for them. I've gotten to do some of them. Some of them I never did get a chance to do, but I'm fascinated by the history behind them all. So I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed your picks. And I particularly enjoyed those moments when you referenced your time with your parents, and in particular your time with your dad. I lost my dad at a very young age. I don't have those memories. I wasn't old enough to have those memories with him. But to hear you and others in my life who have those experiences, I'm never jealous and never envious. I'm always happy for them. That's what Walt Disney World is, and Disney parks in general. It's not just a time to ride all the rides. It's a time to spend that time with your family. And so I enjoyed it. I really dug it. Fantastic episode, Lou. And, man, I am so jealous, though. Those meet of the months that you're going to have, Tom Sawyer Island and Dinoland, I wish I lived local. I wish I could make them. Maybe someday. But for now, I will enjoy listening to you and interacting with all our friends in the group. So thank you so much, Lou, for everything you do. Take care. Bye.
Hey, Lou, it's Patrice Roberti from Metro Boston. It is Friday. It is the 30th of August. And thanks to you, this beautiful box came today. It's a people mover, and it's really neat, and it's beautifully made. Thank you so much. It's a beautiful, beautiful miniature. My God. Happy Labor Day to you and yours, and thank you again. I love that you're doing these boxes as surprises, because it came as a complete surprise today, and it's lovely, it's charming, just like you. You're lovely, you're charming. Thank you.
A warm welcome back to those of you who made it, and a friendly word of warning. Something you won't find in any guidebook. The next time you check into a deserted hotel on the dark side of Hollywood, make sure you know just what kind of vacancy you're filling, or you may find yourself a permanent resident of the Twilight Zone.